Good morning. Good morning. Monday morning. Here is the thumbnail for today for the few seconds that it will survive. It is January 2025. And I'll see here if I do have audio confirmation. And I'm going to do.
DougBetts said, "Hi, how you doing?"
That gives me a confirmation. I saw the audio indicator that you're hearing SpeakerBot, and I see the audio indicator saying that you're hearing me at proper levels. If you now, for the people that are watching live, I'm not talking to you right now. For the people who might be watching this video after the live stream is over, if you came to this video because of the thumbnail and the title that you saw, and if it's different than what's currently on here, that would be because after the show is over, I realized, hey, this would have a better title and a better thumbnail. If I change it, it might attract viewers. If you came here because of that, you might want to look at the description of the video. You might want to go watch the last few minutes of the video where I'll probably give a summary if you don't feel that you want to watch how this topic develops. If it goes the way my preconceived notion thinks it's going to go. And we may have some other things that we talk about along the way. I kind of feeling like that might be a good disclaimer for me to give regularly on this show. Let's go say hello to people in chat. Pop out chat. I have that video in the background paused so we don't see the picture-in-picture, the mirroring effect. Toto was the trader today. There's a link in the description of the trader. John Williams says, nice trader on this cold morning in Madison. It's -1 degrees Fahrenheit, but should warm up later this week. And John says, when we got home from a road trip on Saturday, I watched your live stream from Saturday, and being I am a computer builder, it was painful to watch. John, you might not realize this, and other people might not realize that, but to every content creator, a comment like that is going to feel like a extremely harsh criticism. I don't think you meant it that way because you've been around here long enough. I'm guessing that you meant it that you could empathize with the struggle of the situation as being painful, but any content creator is going to see this painful to watch and they're going to say, oh, I'm a bad presenter.
Yes. Affirmative.
I was all bad in the way that I did my live stream. So John Williams says, yes. I'm going to assume you mean yes, that you did not mean it as a really harsh criticism. But I had to tell myself, that's not what he means. That's not what he means. Calm down. That's not what he means. I think people when talking in chat or even video comments do not realize sometimes how easily their comment can be mistaken. So unless you give me more specifics about that, about how I did an awful job, I'm going to assume that it was just painful because of the computer building experience. And perhaps you can relate. Maybe you've had similar things. Okay, moving on. Alice Jones, hello. Ran Israel, Jeff Ryman. Jeff, it turns out there was another factor at play Saturday. It appears that the HDMI cable I used for the first monitor may be flaky. I will run some tests and let you know. Well, that's interesting. I have some other follow-up comments of my own, and that's kind of why I gave that little spiel at the beginning, because I have some things that, hey, wait a minute, what about this and this? I have questions to bring up. Brian, perhaps the most evil thing I've ever done. Wait a minute. That's true. Perhaps the most evil thing I've ever done was that time I photoshopped Waldo out of Where's Waldo's pic and sent it to my coworkers. That's a good one. That's a good one. I've spent a number of times trying to find Waldo in those collage of pictures, and they're kind of fun. Hey, Doug, why did you just go to camera 1 and do all that weird emotional stuff. There's a reason for that. Ulterior motive. You know how when you go to watch videos and you float your mouse over and you see this a little clip of the video? I'm pretty sure that the YouTube algorithm picks out what was one of the most emotionally charged pieces in that video. And I'm going to be curious if tomorrow, when you float your mouse over this video, does it show that little clip? I think it's going to. And that would be in addition to titles are important, thumbnails are important, but also that little clip that YouTube decides to show. I sometimes choose to click on a video based on what I see there. That could be a thing. Experiment time. The most common programming language is C++, JavaScript, or Python. It's profanity. What? Wait a minute. Oh, this is another joke, I think. No, that's not how to do that, Doug. Alt-2 when your mouse is away. The most common programming language is C++, JavaScript, or Python. It's profanity. It's somewhere in there's a joke, I promise you. The most common there's pro and programming language. Oh, I get it. All right, I got to move this up so it can be seen. I get it. The most common language used when programmers are programming something is not C++, JavaScript, or Python. It's profanity. That's what they use most when they're programming. Brian, did I get that right? Listen up. It's coming. Hopefully it's coming. Selden Ball, Jeff Ryman. To Brian. Oh, he's saying you're right about that. Skimming.
Yes, affirmative.
Yes, finally. Finally. He had to go run back over to the keyboard. He was probably away from keyboard, AFK. Wait a minute, that's interesting. I don't remember that coming through for DougBot. That exclamation mark D is not available for civilians. It's only available for executives. DougBot is an executive, but I didn't hear it do that. Extreme buffering. I do not have any drop frames, so it's not me, it's you. Donald Trump took oath as president. Was that now or was that an hour ago? Is that just 8 minutes ago? I knew it was going to be around the same time as my show. Charlie Purdy, hello. Charlie Purdy come in recently with a $50 Amazon gift and some gift memberships. Answers are free. Right answers will cost you. Rick Lakes, hello. John Williams of E Minor. Not intending to skip anybody's name and saying hello. Rand to Zavi, feeling like this? Oh, okay, that would be, 8 years ago. Inauguration. All right, I'm going to stay away from politics. John Williams, I would have done a clean install Windows 10 11 without altering it with Rufus. He did that. That's exactly what he did. He did a clean install and was still having the problem. That would not have solved anything. He did exactly that and was still having the problem. So I'm not sure why you're saying that. Or maybe you're saying that's why you empathize, because that's the same way you would have done it. He who laughs last didn't get the joke. Well, that's not true. He who laughs last got the joke, but last. Was this another joke? Were you trying to say, do I get that this is a joke? This is a joke. He who laughs last didn't get the joke. That's not true. If he laughed, the person did get the joke. No trust in programming. I'm going to guess that was trust. TJ. Could have been an H, no thust. TKUST? No, I don't know. TU, I don't know. Trust.
Read chat, please.
Jeff, comment after my quotation.
Read chat, please.
Probably not just. Oh, not just in programming. Oh, yeah. So Jeff's comment after my quotation. All that I altered with Rufus was answering a few questions, automatically skipping BitLocker. Yeah, but he did. Let's see. I would have done a clean install without. Oh, you're saying without using Rufus. Okay, I misunderstood that. I didn't read close enough. John Williams, I would have done a clean install without using Rufus. That wasn't going to change anything. That wouldn't have changed the outcome at all. John Downey, Jason Wyrick. John Downey just now. Does that mean you just got the joke? Jason, I did an 11 upgrade on an unsupported system last night. My personal system, not a customer, but I used Rufus. No problem. And yes, he did mean that he just got the joke. Right? Is that what I was saying? Not just now. John Downey. Yeah, just got the joke. All right. So some things that reflections on Saturday. Well, let me point out something. I had told you during that show or at the end of that show, somewhere along the line, that this is, I want and need to do more of this kind of thing, where I find a big, long description and go through it and offer suggestions, and the community offers suggestions as a good type of show content for my YouTube channel, where I can put in a thumbnail that's on target and a title that's on target. Let me show you what happened because of that. Here, that show is 582 views, which is very big for my shows. If I scroll down here, keep in mind 582, 147, 105, 146, 207, 426, 281, 225. So that was a really good producing show. What YouTube does with that later, that has the potential of being a green content that might just keep producing views down the road. So that I have a few ideas in mind of ways to cover more things like that.
Read chat, please.
Jeff says, just to be clear, I am very appreciative of everything DougBetts did and all the suggestions from the viewers. Yes, you're certainly welcome, Jeff. And to my recollection, and even review, Gary Weisenberger was the first comment that came up pointing out the need for the chipset. Now, I have modified that video since then in the description, and I want to show you that. So if I come over here to view your channel and live, and here's showing still 7 views per hour. Now this is one of those add-ins. What's that thing called that vidIQ. That gives me this. It's still generating 7 views per hour, which when you look at these others, that's a pretty significant higher continuation. Then if I go into this video, pause it, and then come down here, I want you to be aware of what I may do to videos after they run. So it's a different, well, I think that's a slightly different name, because in parentheses now it says solved live, because we did solve it during the live show. And I put in some timestamps. Detailed description of the problem, symptom begins, beginning of my ideas for identifying and solving the problem. The only thing in my ideas that was on point was saying that it shouldn't be this hard. Something basic was missed. And yes, that's exactly what happened. Something basic, fundamental was missed. But I got a question to bring up even about that. My reaction to comments on the videos, that's not related to the title. First realization of the actual cause of the problem came from this chat comment. So if you click on that, it'll take you right to that point in the video. And this is where Gary Weisenberger's comment, did you try the latest AMD chipset drivers? And then another piece, connecting remote to the problem computer, but then here, first view a device manager. And there's a piece of this that I did not notice when we saw this, but people in chat did. So bring that up, going into device manager. And then here, my eyes went straight to the display driver, and this did not even register with me. And this is where people in chat said, hey, that means chipset drivers are not loaded. And that was at least very substantial source of the trouble, maybe not the sole piece. And that's what I want to bring up some other questions. See what you folks think in chat. Keeping in mind, I'm not a builder, so I have limited amount of experience in this area, but I have other questions. Solution installing the chipset drivers. So this comes at this point where we download the chipset drivers. I'll pause that. And then we talked about my defective RAM and then proof of the solution. And this is where we went and enabled that device and saw that the screen no longer went black. It is running right now. Finally, there, and there goes black to load the correct driver. And this is where Jeff's past experience was that it would stay black. My
read chat, please.
Subsequent questions. Windows Update delivered a GPU driver, but not the chipset drivers. Yes. With OEM computers, Dell and HP, for instance, you'll get chipset drivers. 95% certain I'm saying that right, because when I do fresh installs on them, well, I do sometimes still go to the manufacturer's website and grab drivers. But no, Windows Update did not do the chipset drivers. And my understanding, that is commonplace with custom builds. But here's one thing that a person might have thought during the course of that video on Saturday is that Jeff did not install the chipset drivers or did not know to install the chipset drivers. But wait, that was a fresh install of Windows. We knew that he had just done the fresh install of Windows. Jeff, my question to you. Back in fall, when you first set this computer up and you had some troubles, and then it seemed to be stable, and then you left it on the shelf for a while, do you know if you had installed chipset drivers back then? Because if you had, and you still had a problem, then that would say the chipset drivers alone did not fix it, but rather that both the BIOS update and the chipset drivers were needed. And he answers in chat, no, he did not back then. So that takes us back to, yeah, probably the chipset drivers was all that was needed. But he was also a few versions behind on the BIOS update. I had downloaded all the drivers from ASUS, but never got around to installing them. So he was aware of doing that, but he had not actually installed them. So the computer sat on the shelf for a while, for a month and a half or something like that, I think it was, from November to mid-January. Could easily have forgotten about still needing to install the drivers from ASUS, and then ran into the black screen problem. Am I recalling correctly? He says exactly. Exactly. So he had forgotten. So if he had remembered that piece, or if he'd done it back then, he probably wouldn't have had this problem come up at all. So here's another thing that I want to ask amongst the builders. I'm wondering since the computer was a few versions behind in BIOS, and I don't remember calendar-wise how long that was. Was that like a year behind or what? It's actually in the video, and I was wanting to go review it so I could have that information right now, but I did not get around to that. But I'm wondering, would it be appropriate to routinely do a BIOS update before even installing Windows, then install Windows, and then it seems to me when we watch Kerry Holzman that he'll do the Windows updates and then do the manufacturer updates, and that always seems to work fine. The idea came across my mind is, would there be any argument for doing the manufacturer chipset updates before the Windows updates? And I would think if you do the Windows updates first and then the chipset updates, you probably need to go back and do the Windows updates again, because the chipset update might have triggered some other Windows updates that are needed. So I'm interested in how you respond to that question in chat, and I'm suspecting that Kerry will probably chime in on that and on video comments on his thoughts. Now, I'm not a builder.
Chat, please.
I'm not a builder, so how much do I care? Well, I do care because my video content, I think, is going to continue attracting builders, so I think I'm going to have more head knowledge on it. Rand says BIOS update while building before installing operating system is always a good idea. That seems to make a whole lot of sense to me, because if you're installing the most recent edition of Windows, that should
chat, please.
That should be reliant upon being reasonably current on BIOS update. If you have a motherboard that is excessively behind in BIOS updates, the BIOS might have been updated in order to support the current versions of Windows. So that seems to make a lot of logical sense to me. Zavi, I repeat that what I wrote on Saturday. A BIOS update was not necessary for the problem. I agree with that. I'd agree with that. I don't think it was necessary. But as a routine rule of thumb for a builder, would it be a good process to do a BIOS update before installing Windows, before installing the drivers? I agree totally with you, Zavi, that the BIOS update was not necessary, and we could have just gone straight to test, most likely gone straight to test for the chipset. Now, Jeff could test that for us if he felt motivated to do that, because his motherboard does have the BIOS flashback. He could load that older version of BIOS from the manufacturer's website onto his USB drive and then use the BIOS flashback method to revert his BIOS back to that, then do a fresh install of Windows, prove that the symptom is still present, then do only the chipset drivers without updating the BIOS, and expect to see the symptom gone, if he was interested in proving that point. He has more time on his hands, so it's marginally possible he might be curious about that, and he might like to prove Zavi correct. But I'm totally on board with what you're saying there, Zavi. I don't think the BIOS update was required. If Jeff were to prove the contrary to be true, then the explanation behind that would be that somehow the BIOS update was not sufficient to support the current chipset update. Seems unlikely. I would imagine possible. Please. Jeff says, I intend to test everything, including the cable, but without reverting the BIOS. All right. Let's see. Jim says, BIOS update, Windows install, Windows update, check for missing and unknown drivers, install chipset drivers. And then, Jim, would you expect another Windows update after those chipset drivers might find something else to install? Jeff, I had BIOS 3042 in November, which was released October of 2024. So it wasn't very long out of date. Excuse me. Was released about the same time, and the 3067 was released in December. So the BIOS he had wasn't exceptionally obsolete. Jim says yes about doing the Windows update after the chipset drivers installed. Separate GPUs can be clobbered with outdated Windows drivers. Separate GPUs. Okay, so a graphics adapter card separate from the CPU, not integrated graphics, can be clobbered with obsolete Windows drivers, so not work properly. Jason, typically he does BIOS update first. I think he's probably referring to Kerry Holzman's. He does BIOS update first, installs Windows, then Windows updates, and typically everything is fine. I've seen him go do chipset updates. Are you saying that he normally does not go to the motherboard manufacturer's website and get updates from there? I think I've seen him do whatever the motherboard has for their software that automatically checks for motherboard updates. It seems to me that he does that afterward. So I would put money on it if I was a betting person. Wait, your name is Betts. I'm thinking Kerry's going to give us his version of that sentence right there. Intended to test, oh, I saw that already. AMD chipset driver I recommend to download from AMD first. So Zavi prefers download the chipset driver first. So that would be before doing a BIOS update, before installing Windows, before Windows updates. First, I'm going to say what he means is download it from a different computer so that you have the chipset driver on a USB. First before what? See you later, Jim. If the motherboard is considerably newer than the operating system I'm installing, I'll do OEM drivers first and Windows updates later. So, Rand, do you sometimes intentionally install an obsolete operating system? If the motherboard is considerably newer than the operating system I'm installing, I'll do OEM drivers first from the motherboard manufacturer and Windows updates later. Okay, because the operating system he's installing won't have built-in drivers that could be for that motherboard. So if he's doing an obsolete operating system, okay, that makes sense. I understand why you would do chipset drivers and other motherboard drivers.
Read chat, please.
First before Windows updates. Just don't know why you're installing obsolete operating systems. May have reason for that. For example, the latest Windows 10 build. Okay, yeah, it's be considered obsolete. Last year I installed a couple of these on much newer boards. All right, I get it. I suppose I could have imagined that if I would have tried harder. Let's go with that. Jeff Duran, that's what I should have done. I just forgot about the drivers I'd already downloaded. Yeah, so he was aware of it, just slipped his mind. And that's something that can happen. Just, it's one of those cases where you say, oh, I should have thought of that. I knew better. Haven't we all been there? And Zavi said, board manufacturer in relationship to this. AMD chipset driver is the board manufacturer. I recommend to download from AMD first. Yeah, I was asking, what do you mean first before installing Windows, before building the computer? What are you referring to as first? Board manufacturer doesn't really answer that. That Greg M usually do BIOS updates, Windows and chipset drivers, and install Windows, then chipset drivers. And I would assume Windows updates after the chipset drivers is what you're saying. Usually you have to go search for AMD drivers from their website. Intel drivers are usually installed with Windows itself. That makes sense. Yeah, when you're doing a lot at once, it's easy to forget what you've done, particularly when you leave something on a shelf for a while. At one point, I had tried to install drivers, GPUs, chipset, etc. from a single AMD.exe file, and the screen went black as soon as the GPU driver loaded. Oh, that was another piece about the sequence of events. And this is why I was questioning the BIOS, because the sequence of events, he installed Windows, a current version of Windows, and then Windows installed the graphics driver in some instances, at least, before he could even have a chance to download the chipset drivers. And that would be supporting reason for, let's see, who was it that said installing, I think it was Zavi. Yeah, download from AMD first. So before even doing the Windows install, because there's a portion of this story with Jeff where he couldn't, after installing Windows, he couldn't get to download the chipset drivers because the screen would go black. Now, we did get to that, able to do that during Saturday's show. I think it was probably because he had updates on hold that allowed us to get to the chipset drivers. But this is where Savi is saying download the chipset drivers first, and that would have to be to a different computer so that then you could, I guess, use a USB drive to move that to the subject computer before ever connecting to the internet. Because once he connects to the internet without having Windows updates paused, the screen goes black before he could download the chipset drivers. And that made me wonder, is it possible that if he had first had a BIOS update, would that BIOS update have allowed him to get the chipset drivers without the screen going black? I'm not contradicting that the chipset drivers was the fix. Don't jump down my throat. Some motherboards like Gigabyte and Asus will download manufacturer drivers via their own driver installer that comes up after installing Windows. Let's see, before download from Asus motherboard drivers. So he's trying to clarify my question back here, I think. I recommend to download AMD first, board manufacturer, before download from Asus mother. I guess he means before installing Windows. It still feels like there's words missing from that. And I know, Zavi, you're frustrated that I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm not, I just don't. That's one of the things I included in the, I tried a bunch of stuff and got the system so messed up I couldn't repair it. I did all the downloads on my older computer. All right, so it's time for me to give a summary. For the people who clicked onto this video because they saw a title and a thumbnail that interested them, which I do intend to change the thumbnail and the title. The summary is there is a with a little bit of pushback, a reasonable consensus at this point in time that do the BIOS update, then install Windows, and then whether you do the motherboard chipset or the Windows updates first feels like a little bit of a toss-up to me from the community. And there may be more information in the description and in comments on the video, because I anticipate probably getting a comment on this video from Kerry Holzman that'll point out his routine. But the subject, the title of this video and the thumbnail is going to be along the lines of best sequence of update events for new custom builds, something like that. It'll go through some wordsmithing. Last check on chat. When I did my original 5700G build, integrated graphics, I had an odd situation where display port cable worked, but not the HDMI cable before installing the AMD graphics driver. Well, that's interesting because I recently had one of these B-Link computers. I think it was a B-Link, one of the mini computers that had a display port that was not working. But that was manufacturer installed operating system. That was not me doing a fresh install. So I think that one actually had a defective port. The HDMI was not working before the graphics driver. Interesting. Totally believable. I think that even makes sense. Asus has a newer chipset driver than AMD is offering. The Bronc 9, my latest Windows Auto update has stopped audio working, doing system restore to rectify. Yeah, that's then delay, then postpone updates. By the time your maximum postpone is expired, it'll probably be fixed. Okay, so in case somebody came all the way to the end, there is a summary that I made just a few minutes ago of the content of this video. So that'll do it for today. I hope you all have a really, really great Monday, and I will catch you later. Goodbye.
That's all, folks.